The cold breath of winter was already crawling through the narrow streets of the old village when the first frost appeared on the thatched roofs. The year was somewhere in the late 14th century, a time when the air carried the scent of burning wood and melting wax, and every woman who lived through those long, unforgiving winters knew that survival was not only a matter of food or fire but of care, of tending to the body like one tends to a small, fragile flame. In those days, women in the northern parts of Europe, places like Denmark, England, and the cold edges of France had no mirrors of glass, no warm showers, no perfumes bottled in crystal. Yet, they carried within them a wisdom so ancient that each movement, each ritual, seemed almost sacred. Their knowledge was not written in books. It was whispered from mother to daughter, passed down in candlelit rooms where the walls themselves seemed to listen. As the snow began to fall thicker, the rhythm of life changed. The fields were dead, the earth hard as stone, and men spent their days chopping firewood or mending roofs. For women, winter meant both stillness and struggle. It was the time when their hands cracked from washing linen in icy water, when their faces burned from the wind that howled through the open cracks of their cottages. But it was also a season of quiet self-care, a kind of ancient ritual. They performed not out of vanity, but out of need and reverence for their own bodies. Inside the cottages, light came from a few candles and the orange glow of the hearth. The women used every bit of warmth to keep themselves and their children alive. In the evenings, after the work of the day was done, they would gather near the fire. There, they would unwrap their shawls, pull back their sleeves, and begin the small acts of care that connected them to generations before. Water was scarce and precious in winter. Streams froze, buckets cracked, and so they collected snow in wooden tubs near the hearth, letting it melt slowly. The melted water, though never warm enough, was mixed with herbs, rosemary, thyme, and sage if they could afford it. These herbs weren't chosen for fragrance alone. They were thought to cleanse the body, to keep away the fevers that came with dampness and cold. The scent of herbs would fill the room, mingling with smoke and the faint sweetness of beeswax. Bathing was not frequent. Once every few weeks, perhaps, when the weather allowed and when enough water could be heated. A large iron pot would hang over the fire, and when the water reached just the right warmth, they would pour it into a wooden tub. One by one, the women would bathe, modestly, sometimes with linen cloths wrapped around themselves. They scrubbed their skin with rough linen or crushed oats, a natural exfoliant that softened their hands and faces. For hair, they used a mixture of egg yolk and vinegar, an ancient remedy that left the hair clean and glossy. Even in the dim candlelight. In those quiet hours, their voices would rise softly in some old folk tunes that carried stories of love, war, and loss. It was in these songs that they found warmth beyond the fire. The act of singing together, of caring for one another, became part of their beauty ritual. Though they would never have called it that, it was simply living. Their skin, constantly exposed to cold wind and rough wool, required protection. They made simple salves from animal fat mixed with crushed herbs. Goose fat was especially prized. It melted smoothly into the skin, sealing in moisture. Some women, particularly those who worked in the manor houses or monasteries, had access to almond oil or honey, which they used to make soft pastes for their faces. The scent was earthy, natural, nothing like the perfumes of later centuries. But it carried with it the warmth of the hearth, the memory of summer meadows, the care for the body extended to the care for the soul. Many believed that keeping the body clean, in whatever way possible, also kept the spirit pure. On Sunday mornings, before church, women would rinse their faces with cold water infused with mint or chamomile. They would braid their hair tightly, wrapping it in linen veils or woolen caps. The braids kept their hair from tangling during sleep and work, and the coverings protected them from both the cold and the eyes of strangers. In the long nights, when the wind screamed outside and the snow piled high against the door, they found small comforts in ritual. A woman might sit by the fire, warming a piece of linen soaked in oil, pressing it gently to her cheeks. Another might massage her hands with melted tallow, whispering prayers as she did, asking for health through the harsh months ahead. These were moments of solitude, of self-respect in a world that rarely granted women rest. For younger women, the lessons came slowly. A mother would guide her daughter's hand, showing her how to mix herbs in the right proportion, how to rub the balm into the skin until it vanished, how to braid the hair so tightly that it could last through days of work. These gestures, repeated winter after winter, became a language of love and an inheritance not of gold or land, but of knowledge. And there was beauty in that world. Though it did not shine, it glowed quietly, in the way the light from the fire caught a strand of hair, or how the steam from the tub rose like a small ghost into the night. The women of those winters knew beauty as endurance. They knew that to care for themselves was to resist the cold, to defy time itself. Sometimes, in the deep of night, when the rest of the house slept, a woman would take a small shard of polished metal, her only mirror, and study her reflection. The flicker of the flame distorted her face, but she could see her eyes, steady and strong. She would smile faintly, not out of vanity, but out of pride. She had survived another day, kept her family warm, kept her spirit intact. Outside, the snow would keep falling, muffling every sound. Inside, the faint sound of water dripping from the melted snow bucket, the creak of wood, the slow breath of those asleep, all these made a symphony of survival. As the narrator of such times, one could almost feel the warmth of that fire, smell the herbs, and hear the whispers of women long gone. Their rituals were small, almost invisible, but they were acts of quiet rebellion against a world of frost. They taught themselves to heal, to endure, to remain human in the face of endless winter. Their world was fragile, yes, but also fiercely alive. And within every act of care, every balm, every braid, every song, there lay the same message that echoes through centuries, that even in the coldest season, the human heart finds warmth in the tending of itself. And so, through the frost and fire, the story of medieval women's winter care begins not with grand gestures or miracles, but with small, steadfast acts of love, carried out beneath the hush of snow and the dim light of a dying flame. The mornings in winter were merciless. The frost would cling to the edges of wooden doors, and the sun, when it rose, cast a pale, gray light that barely warmed the earth. Women awoke before anyone else, moving quietly through the darkened rooms, careful not to wake sleeping children or husbands. The first tasks were always the most urgent. Fire. A hearth without warmth was more than discomfort, it was danger. And so, With practiced hands, they added kindling, coaxed flames from glowing embers, and set pots of water to heat. Once the fire was alive, attention turned to their own bodies. The air in the cottage was dry from the smoke, but biting with cold from the frozen windows. Women would start with their hands, rubbing them briskly with softened fat or a small mix of crushed herbs. The act was both practical and intimate, a moment to reconnect with their own flesh. After hours of sleep, fingers stiff from cold needed the careful massage, joints eased into movement, nails scrubbed clean with small brushes fashioned from straw or leftover wood shavings. Even in the simplest cottages, these rituals were never neglected, because cracked hands could make survival unbearable. Washing the face was another carefully measured ordeal. Cold water from melted snow was sometimes the only option, but the women learned to make it bearable. A splash here, a dab with soft cloth there, and finally a thin layer of herb-infused fat or honey to seal moisture into the skin. They understood the delicate balance of cold and protection, and they knew the consequences of neglect: red, chapped skin, sores that could fester in the harsh winter air. Their faces, though rarely smooth by modern standards, carried a healthy resilience, and there was pride in that endurance. Hair, too, demanded attention. Long braids were common, practical against both cold and work, and they were meticulously cared for. Egg yolk rinses, sometimes mixed with vinegar, were applied weekly, and those fortunate enough to have access to animal oils used them sparingly. To keep the strands supple, women often slept with a small linen cloth wrapped around their braids, protecting hair from dirt, lice, and the crushing weight of woolen blankets. The labor of hair care was intertwined with patience, and for young girls, these lessons were a rite of passage taught by mother, aunt, or grandmother. Clothing was another essential layer of protection. Wool, linen, and, for those of means, fur were carefully cleaned, mended, and layered. A woman's daily work often began with inspecting garments, sewing loose threads, patching holes, and turning hems inside out to hide wear. They soaked fabrics in cold water, sometimes lightly scented with herbs, and wrung them out with hands that were now calloused, but sensitive enough to detect weakness in the weave. Clothes were not merely a matter of modesty. They were armor against frostbite and illness, and carelessness could mean more than discomfort. It could mean sickness or death. Meals were prepared with the same methodical attention. Winter vegetables, roots, cabbages, preserved herbs were cleaned, chopped, and boiled over the hearth. Stews were thickened with barley, peas, or the occasional grain, and every morsel was infused with herbs believed to ward off cold-related ailments. A woman's health depended on the nourishment she provided, not only for herself, but for those who relied on her. Even the act of tasting the stew became part of the ritual, a careful sip to test salt, temperature, and consistency, ensuring that the food would sustain the family through the hours of bitter work outside. When illness inevitably struck, the knowledge women carried became critical. A cold could easily become pneumonia, a fever could turn fatal, and for this reason, herbal remedies were carefully prepared. Teas of chamomile, linden, or elderflower were brewed in small iron kettles, and poultices made of plantain, willow bark, or comfrey were applied to aching limbs or inflamed skin. The preparation was meticulous. The herbs were crushed, boiled, or soaked in water or wine, and then administered with care. These practices were not merely superstition, they were rooted in observation, learned from experience, and honed over generations. The day's labor was long, but evening brought a different kind of ritual. Women would gather round the fire, their hands still rough from work, their faces flushed with the effort of cooking, mending, and cleaning. It was here, in these hours, that self-care became more reflective. They might trim nails, scrape heels, rub oil into elbows and knees, or massage sore shoulders. The movements were gentle but deliberate, a way to honor their bodies for enduring yet another day. This was also the time for storytelling, songs, and sometimes quiet laughter, reminders that the human spirit could thrive, even when the body was wearied. In wealthier households, the routines were more elaborate. Women in manor houses had access to warm water daily, linen gloves, scented oils, and even rudimentary cosmetics made from crushed minerals. But even in these homes, winter demanded care and diligence. They followed similar rituals of bathing, hair treatment, and protective salves, often assisted by daughters or servants. Observing these practices in larger houses, one would notice a continuity. The principles of self-care were consistent. Whether in a peasant cottage or a noble hall, cleanliness, protection from the cold, nourishment, and tender attention to the body were universal imperatives. Sleep, too, was a carefully considered practice. Beds were layered with straw, covered with wool blankets, and for those who could afford it, feather mattresses. Women often slept in shifts, especially when tending to infants or sick family members. They protected their skin from the harsh winter air by covering their faces with scarves or cloths, keeping their hands tucked close to their bodies. These precautions were not trivial. Frostbite was a real and constant threat, and women learned to recognize the early signs, adjusting layers or adding more firewood to the hearth. The interplay of labor, nourishment, and ritualized care created a rhythm that carried them through the months when the sun seemed absent. And yet, even amidst exhaustion, there was a beauty in the small acts of preservation, the careful braiding of hair, the rubbing of oil into hands, the steaming of herbs in a pot. These were gestures of defiance against the relentless winter, affirmations of life and endurance. By the time night fell, the cottage was steeped in a quiet, warm glow. Flames flickered across faces lined with effort, hands softened by herbal salves, hair braided with precision, and skin shielded by ointments. In these moments, the care women bestowed upon themselves was not vanity. It was survival. It was love. It was the continuity of generations. Every movement, every measured ritual, was a testament to resilience and knowledge preserved against the cold, against time, and against neglect. And so, in the long winters of medieval Europe, the body was tended as carefully as the hearth, the soul nourished as delicately as the evening meal. Women learned to endure, to protect, and to cherish themselves within the confines of frost and shadow. In every small act of care, there existed a quiet triumph, a declaration that even in the bleakest season, life could be nurtured and the human spirit could remain tender, strong, and alive. The midwinter nights were long, stretching their black velvet across the sky, interrupted only by the pale gleam of stars and the occasional flicker of the moon through the bare branches. In such darkness, the world seemed smaller, the village quieter, and yet inside the cottages, life pulsed with quiet insistence. The women, who had labored from dawn through frost and wind, now faced another kind of task, tending to the inner warmth, the comfort of their own minds, and the emotional equilibrium of the household. It was said that cold could creep not only into the bones, but into the spirit, and so the practices of self-care extended beyond the body. A woman might sit near the hearth, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of herbal infusion, inhaling the scent of chamomile or mint. She would allow herself a moment to reflect, to remember the days of summer when the meadows were green and the sun touched the skin without chill. These small mental retreats were as vital as the fat rubbed into hands or the hair braided to protect against frost. They were rituals of survival, ensuring that the mind remained as resilient as the body. Stories were told with deliberate care. Mothers recounted tales of clever women, of saints, and of the spirits that roamed the forest, teaching lessons about patience, courage, and ingenuity. Even in the quietest moments, the narration had a rhythm, a musicality that soothed the mind and strengthened resolve. Girls learned not only of herbs and fat salves, but also of cleverness and foresight, of how to navigate a world where winter could be merciless and opportunity scarce. The act of listening, of absorbing these tales, was considered part of personal maintenance and essential exercise in endurance and moral fortitude. Silence, too, was observed as a kind of medicine. Women learned to sit quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire, the wind's howl outside, the low breathing of those asleep. This attentiveness trained the senses, fostered patience, and offered a subtle comfort, an awareness that even in the coldest, darkest night, the body and spirit were capable of stillness and harmony. Nighttime baths, when they occurred, were extended rituals of care. Water warmed over the fire, though never too hot, was poured slowly, enveloping limbs, easing stiff muscles, and washing away the grime of daily labor. Oils or herb-infused salves followed, applied with gentle but deliberate pressure, massaging warmth into the extremities. Some women would whisper soft prayers or blessings as they moved through the motions, believing that such words reinforced the potency of their remedies. Others hummed familiar tunes, creating a quiet resonance that mingled with the hiss of the hearth and the occasional whistle of the wind outside. Clothing at night was handled with the same meticulous care. Women would lay out thick woolen layers to prevent drafts, smooth linen sheafs over the skin, and fold garments with precision to protect them from pests like moths. They understood that proper layering, combined with protective fabrics, could mean the difference between waking refreshed and waking shivering. With bones stiff and spirits low, caps, hoods, and scarves were not mere adornments, but vital shields against the frost that seeped through the smallest crack in the cottage walls. Meals, too, became an act of reflection. A simple broth or a roasted root was consumed slowly, savoring its warmth and nourishment. Women taught children to eat with attentiveness, to recognize the sustenance that winter grudgingly offered, and to respect the labor it took to bring each bite from field and forest to the pot. Food, carefully prepared and consumed, became part of the broader philosophy of care, tending the body with intention, conserving energy, and fortifying the spirit for the days to come. In moments when the family slept and the household rested, women sometimes performed private exercises, stretching stiff joints, rotating wrists, massaging calves. These small movements were often done silently, Yet they were vital, maintaining mobility and preventing injury during work that required constant bending, lifting, or tending fires. Every deliberate stretch, every careful rub of the limbs was a practice of foresight, an acknowledgement that survival required attention to both the immediate and the long-term health of the body. The interplay between warmth, moisture, and protection was central to their understanding of wellness. They noticed subtle signals, the way skin became taut and red, the dryness of lips, the stiffening of fingers. These cues dictated immediate action. A dab of fat, a splash of herb water, a shift in bedding all became acts of observation, adaptation, and intervention. It was knowledge born of necessity, accumulated over decades, and passed down quietly from mother to daughter. Some women recorded their own variations in memory rather than in ink, devising small innovations, a blend of herbs for sore joints, a unique method of rolling hair to protect it from lice, a new layering technique for sleeping safely through the coldest nights. These adaptations were subtle, practical, and immensely effective, though rarely acknowledged beyond the family. They were intimate inventions, shaped by both observation and imagination, and they reflected a culture where survival and self-care were inseparable. Social interaction, even in winter, played a role in the rhythm of care. Women visited neighbors when snow allowed, bringing small gifts of preserved food or handmade ointments. They exchanged advice, recipes, and observations on weather, illness, and herbs. These visits, though brief, provided emotional support and a subtle continuity of practice. Seeing a friend's careful methods or sharing a solution for cracked hands reinforced the communal knowledge that ensured survival. In many ways, winter care was as much social as it was personal. It depended on observation, imitation, and adaptation within a network of women who silently upheld one another as the night deepened. Some women would retreat further into reflection. They thought about past winters, about losses and births, about days when illness struck unexpectedly. They remembered the women who had come before, the mothers, aunts, grandmothers, and how each had faced the harshness of winter with quiet fortitude. In this contemplation, they found guidance, courage, and a sense of continuity. The body was attended to not only through sobs and warmth, but through the memory of generations who had endured far harsher seasons. That sleep eventually came, though rarely undisturbed. Even then, women remained alert, attuned to the small sounds that might indicate danger: a settling roof, a crack of ice on a distant stream, the whimper of a child. The vigilance was instinctive, a final layer of care for themselves and for those who depended on them. Blankets were tucked carefully, straw and wool arranged to provide insulation, and small pillows or cloths placed to shield faces from drafts. In these hours, the body could finally rest, protected not only by layers and fire, but by centuries of learned attentiveness. Thus, the nights passed, long and unyielding, and yet filled with ritual, care, and resilience. Medieval women understood that survival in winter was an art and integration of physical tending, mental preparation, and social continuity. Every stitch in a garment, every drop of melted water, every carefully applied salve reflected a profound understanding that the human body, while vulnerable, could be nurtured and preserved through knowledge, attention, and patience. And in this quiet, enduring vigilance, the essence of medieval winter care emerged. It was not showy, it was not grand, but it was deeply human, profoundly practical, and silently beautiful. Through firelight, frost, and the hush of long nights, women maintained themselves, their families, and the continuity of life against the merciless rhythm of winter. Winter in the medieval village was not merely a season, it was a test of endurance, patience, and careful planning. Beyond the frost, the darkness, and the scarcity of resources, there lay the deeper challenge, the emotional resilience of those who lived in a world ruled by harsh climate and uncertain health. Women, in particular, bore the brunt of both physical and emotional labor, managing households, tending children, and sustaining their families through months when the sun barely rose and the snow threatened to isolate them entirely. The morning began in quiet determination. As dawn crept through frost-laden windows, women moved with measured steps, mindful of the fragile warmth of the fire, careful not to waste precious wood. Their hands, already hardened from work and the bite of cold, were massaged quickly with fat or herbal salves to restore suppleness. Before beginning the day's labor, preparing the household for the day was not merely functional, it was a deeply embodied ritual. Every action, from fetching water to stirring the pot, was intertwined with awareness of the body's limits and strengths. Childbirth during the winter was a particularly daunting challenge. The cold posed serious threats, not only to the mother, but to the newborn. Women relied heavily on knowledge passed down from generations. Midwives, experienced and often wise from decades of practice, guided younger women through labor. The room would be warmed with fires, cloths soaked in heated water were carefully prepared, and soft blankets layered to ensure the infant would not succumb to the chill. Herbs such as rosemary and sage were burned or placed in water, believed to purify the air and strengthen both mother and child. In such moments, the practices of physical care were inseparable from emotional support. The calming presence of experienced hands, whispered prayers, and gentle reassurances. After the birth, the process of tending to the newborn extended beyond feeding. Mothers and midwives would meticulously massage tiny hands and feet with soft fats, ensuring circulation and warmth. Clothing for the infant was layered thoughtfully, often wrapped in linen and wool, ensuring that each fold shielded the delicate body from cold drafts. This attention, repeated countless times across households, was a testament to the careful observation medieval women exercised over every stage of life. Every act, from wrapping a blanket to warming water for washing, carried an awareness of fragility and the importance of sustaining life. Community networks were essential for survival. Women relied on one another not just for labor, but for emotional support, shared knowledge, and practical remedies. Visits between households were carefully timed to avoid exhausting journeys through deep snow. Yet when women gathered, they exchanged information that could mean the difference between sickness and health, scarcity and sustenance. A neighbor might offer advice on protecting chapped skin from frostbite. Another would share a method to preserve roots for longer periods, and another would provide a comforting presence during the long nights. When fear and fatigue threatened to overwhelm, these interactions were subtle lifelines, reinforcing social bonds while sustaining knowledge crucial for survival. Work continued relentlessly. Preparing and preserving food required constant vigilance. Vegetables, grains, and dried herbs were sorted, cleaned and stored in cool, dry cellars. Women ensured that every root was accounted for, every barrel of salted meat properly sealed, understanding that winter scarcity left no room for waste. At the same time, they cared for the animals' chickens, pigs, cows whose survival was as critical to the family as their own. Feeding and tending livestock in freezing temperatures demanded both physical strength and strategic thinking. Frozen troughs were scraped clean, water carefully thawed, and hay distributed evenly to prevent illness and maintain warmth. Emotional resilience was as much about managing fear as it was about performing tasks. Women often kept themselves and others calm through storytelling, songs, or simple routines. A child frightened by the howl of the wind outside might be soothed with a tale of clever women who outsmarted harsh winters, or a gentle lullaby carried over the crackling fire. Even small gestures, like brushing a child's hair, massaging hands, or offering warm herbal tea, carried profound emotional significance. It was in these moments that the interplay of body and mind became evident. The care of one's own spirit as essential as the care of the flesh. As evening fell, the tasks of survival intertwined with quiet moments of reflection. Women inspected their own bodies for signs of overwork or illness, bruises, swollen joints, cracked skin. They rubbed in fat salves, massaged stiff muscles, and applied herbal poultices. Every act was deliberate, intentional, and thoughtful. It was not indulgence, but a form of acknowledgement, a recognition that their bodies, though tested relentlessly, deserved attention, respect, and protection. Sleep, though necessary, was approached with care. Bedding was layered meticulously, straw, wool, linen, and positioned to conserve warmth. Even the positioning of the body mattered. Hands tucked to preserve heat, infants swaddled to protect them from cold drafts, older children nestled safely between blankets. Vigilance continued even in slumber, for the harsh winters allowed no room for negligence. Women often woke during the night to check on infants, to adjust the fire, or to respond to any sound that might signal danger. These months were not merely about surviving. They were about cultivating a sense of endurance, continuity, and presence. Every small action, every carefully prepared meal, every wrapped blanket, every massaged hand was a contribution to the collective resilience of the household. Women understood, instinctively and through experience, that their role was not only to protect life, but to model fortitude and care, to instill these values in the younger generation through demonstration, instruction, and gentle guidance. In these practices, the boundaries between physical, emotional, and social care dissolved. A warm hand, a carefully braided hair, a shared herbal remedy, a story told softly by the fire, all were components of a holistic approach to life in winter. Survival was not an abstract concept. It was woven into every moment of the day, into every motion, and into the attentive care of oneself and others. By the time the night deepened, the cottage settled into a hushed harmony. The fire glowed steadily. Children slept wrapped in layers of warmth, and women, though weary, felt the quiet satisfaction of work done well. Their bodies were cared for, their spirits tended, and their families nurtured. In the darkness of winter, these routines were the very definition of resilience, a network of acts, small and deliberate, that sustained life and preserved human dignity. And so, the story of winter care in the medieval village unfolded not as dramatic heroism, but as continuous, patient attention to the body, the mind, and the bonds that connected people. It was in the ordinary acts, rubbing fat into chapped hands, braiding hair before bed, preparing a herbal infusion, whispering a lullaby, that true survival and quiet triumph were found. These women, through foresight, knowledge, and unwavering dedication, made it through the harshest months, leaving behind not written records, but enduring practices, lessons carried in memory, and a legacy of resilience that would echo for generations. Even in the heart of the harshest winter, there were moments of quiet joy, subtle pleasures that punctuated the relentless rhythm of labor and care. These moments were never grand, nor were they easy to come by, but they existed nonetheless, tiny islands of warmth in a sea of frost. Women, while managing households, tending children, and maintaining their own bodies, discovered spaces for laughter, creativity, and connection, even when the world outside was a frozen wasteland. Morning chores were still the first priority, but as the hours passed and work was accomplished, women often allowed themselves small indulgences. A warm cup of spiced herbal tea could be sipped slowly, savoring not only the heat it provided, but also the rare comfort of a pause. When snow piled high against the door, blocking travel, it also created a rare stillness, a pause in the endless demands of life. In this quiet, women might hum songs softly, their voices carrying across the cottage, blending with the crackle of the fire and the occasional creak of timber settling under ice. Fireside storytelling remained central, but the content of stories sometimes shifted towards celebration, memory, or gentle humor. Tales of cleverness, trickery, or quiet rebellion brought smiles and laughter. A mother might recount a humorous incident from her own youth, or a neighbor might tease about a goat that slipped into the snowdrifts. These small narratives, shared in safety and warmth, carried their own kind of nourishment, a strengthening of spirit that complemented the physical care women had cultivated throughout the day. Festivals and religious observances provided additional relief and rhythm to the winter months. Saints' days, feasts, and communal prayers offered opportunities to gather, exchange goods, and celebrate survival. Even when these gatherings were modest, often in the church or a neighbor's home, they provided respite from solitude and monotony. Women took pride in preparing special foods, decorating modest spaces with evergreens or dried flowers, and adorning themselves in the cleanest, warmest clothing available. The act of preparation was itself a ritual, affirming skill, taste, and care. Winter leisure also appeared in domestic creativity. Women spun yarn, whereupon, and sewed during long evenings, transforming raw wool or linen into garments, mittens, and blankets. These activities were both productive and soothing, a meditation of the hands, a rhythm that quieted the mind while producing practical results. Children sometimes joined, learning dexterity, patience, and the satisfaction of creation. Through these shared labors, women transmitted knowledge, skill, and values, reinforcing social bonds and ensuring the continuity of practical wisdom across generations. Cooking, too, was a source of small delight. The aroma of roasting root vegetables, stews, or the occasional sweetened treat infused the cottage with warmth and comfort. Though ingredients were often sparse, women took pride in the presentation, seasoning, and timing of meals. They recognized that food was more than sustenance. It was a ritual of care for both body and spirit. A carefully prepared dish could lift the mood, sustain morale, and provide a sense of accomplishment that countered the weight of hardship outside. Evening baths, when water and fire were sufficient, became moments of indulgence. Though modest by modern standards, the act of warming one's body in steaming water, rubbing skin with softened fat, and soothing aching muscles was profoundly pleasurable. Women often allowed themselves to linger a little longer than necessary, savoring the comfort and quiet intimacy of caring for themselves. The flicker of candlelight, the scent of herbs, and the rising steam combined to create a private sanctuary. However fleeting, in the midst of relentless winter. Social visits, too, could become moments of joy. Women exchanged not only advice and practical knowledge, but laughter, small tokens of affection, and shared stories. Even brief encounters provided emotional sustenance, a reminder that, despite isolation, community persisted. Gossip, playful teasing, and storytelling were all part of the fabric that held households together, weaving resilience and warmth into daily life. Children, in their own way, found joy in the season. Snow offered opportunities for simple games, imagination, and delight. Women often watched these small adventures with protective attention, sometimes joining in, sometimes preparing warm food to reward the effort. Through observation and gentle guidance, they nurtured both physical resilience and emotional well-being, understanding that even play had a role in survival and the cultivation of strength. Music, song, and quiet reflection punctuated the days. Women hummed while spinning yarn, whispered prayers at the fire, or softly sang lullabies to children. These sounds created a continuity of rhythm and culture, reinforcing identity and belonging. In a time when isolation could be overwhelming, these auditory rituals provided both comfort and a sense of continuity, a thread linking past, present, and future. The cold itself, though harsh, shaped these moments of subtle joy. A snow-covered landscape could inspire reflection, storytelling, or quiet admiration. A sudden sunbeam through frost-laden windows was noted and cherished. The contrast between harsh exterior and interior warmth heightened appreciation for small pleasures. Women learned to find richness not in abundance, but in careful attention, creativity, and the simple satisfaction of tending life amid adversity. As night fell and the household settled into rest, the women allowed themselves private reflection. They assessed their own health, their progress through tasks, and the comfort of their families. They took pride in small victories: clean hands, braided hair, well-prepared meals, and sleeping children. These were the quiet markers of success, moments where effort, attention, and resilience converge into satisfaction. In these cumulative actions, the medieval winter was transformed from a mere struggle for survival into a landscape of small achievements, nurtured relationships, and human warmth. Each moment of leisure, creativity, or subtle joy was intertwined with care. Physical, emotional, and social survival was inseparable from the cultivation of human spirit, and these women, through careful tending of themselves and their environment, created spaces of endurance, delight, and connection within the relentless cold. Through these practices, winter care was revealed not as a burden, but as an intricate dance of survival and joy. Every herbal infusion, every braided strand, every warm hearth, and every shared story contributed to a life lived fully despite adversity. It was in these delicate, persistent actions that the beauty of medieval women's lives emerged, a testament to resourcefulness, patience, and the enduring warmth of human care. By the time winter had fully set in, weeks of frost and darkness had imprinted themselves on the rhythm of daily life. Yet, within the confines of stone walls, thatched roofs, and flickering firelight, medieval women cultivated practices that protected not only their immediate survival, but also their long-term health. These practices were subtle, interwoven into every movement, every glance, every decision, and carried wisdom that stretched across generations. The body was considered a sacred vessel, and care for it went beyond mere warmth or sustenance. Women took stock of their own energy constantly, learning to pace themselves so that exhaustion did not compromise their ability to provide for others. They alternated heavier chores with lighter ones, tending to clothing, mending garments, and sorting herbs when the body was weary. Stretching and gentle massage became essential practices. Though few would call them formal exercise, these movements preserved mobility, kept joints from stiffening, and reinforced resilience. Dietary habits, though constrained by season and availability, were meticulously designed. Root vegetables, preserved meats, grains, and pulses were combined in stews and breads to maximize nutrition. Herbs were chosen carefully for their believed medicinal properties: sage for digestion, rosemary for circulation, thyme for immunity. Women understood that cold weather amplified vulnerability to illness, and they adjusted food, drink, and activity accordingly. Every meal was deliberate, each portion a measure of both care and foresight. Sleep was approached with the same consciousness. Bedding was layered with straw, wool, and linen to maintain warmth, and sleeping positions were adjusted to protect extremities. Women monitored themselves and their children during the night, aware that even brief exposure to cold could have lasting consequences. When illness struck, small interventions, herbal poultices, warm compresses, or the careful administration of teas were deployed promptly. These actions were preventive as much as they were reactive. Medieval women understood that small attentions accumulated to maintain long-term health. Hygiene, though limited by water availability, was never neglected. Hands, faces, and occasionally bodies were washed with melted snow infused with herbs, and salves were applied to seal moisture into skin exposed to wind and fire. Hair care remained rigorous. Braids were maintained to prevent tangling. Eggs and oils applied when available, and linen or wool coverings protected the scalp during sleep and work. These rituals, though subtle, had profound effects on overall health and comfort, and the lessons were passed down with great care from one generation to the next. Beyond physical care, mental and emotional practices were equally deliberate. Women engaged in reflection, prayer, and storytelling to maintain equilibrium amidst hardship. Journals, if kept, were sparse, but memory itself served as a repository for wisdom. Lessons from mothers, grandmothers, and elder women in the village informed everything from herbal remedies to pacing work, to recognizing subtle signs of fatigue or illness. This intergenerational knowledge was a critical form of resilience, linking past experiences with present needs and ensuring that survival skills endured, even as circumstances changed. Mindfulness of the body and environment extended to small, almost imperceptible acts. adjusting the positioning of blankets to conserve heat, rubbing salve into chapped lips, braiding hair tightly before sleep, or ensuring a child's fingers were warm before covering them all became habitual, instinctual practices. These gestures, repeated daily, created a protective lattice of care. They were acts of foresight, performed in silence, unnoticed by outsiders, yet essential for life to persist through the harsh months. Women also cultivated patience as a form of health maintenance. They understood that forcing the body beyond its capacity led to weakness and illness. They paced themselves during chores, measured the water for baths carefully, timed meals for maximum nourishment, and conserved strength for critical moments. This self-regulation was a skill honed through years of experience and observation, a subtle but vital component of winter survival. Herbal knowledge was interwoven with routine. Infusions, poultices, and ointments were prepared in anticipation, not merely reaction. Leaves and roots were dried during summer and autumn, stored in cool, dark places, and carefully labeled in memory rather than ink. Women observed the effects of each preparation, noting subtle differences in efficacy and adjusting proportions for future use. This iterative practice was a form of empirical science, practical, tested, and refined over decades. Community knowledge continued to play a pivotal role, even in the isolation of winter. Women maintained correspondence through visits, gifts, and exchanges of information. They shared insights about new remedies, adjustments to clothing, or strategies to manage household tasks efficiently. Such interactions reinforced collective wisdom, ensuring that even those in the coldest, most remote cottages could benefit from the experience of the broader community. Reflection remained central to these months. Women often considered their own physical and emotional limits, assessed the progress of children, and projected strategies for the coming days. These contemplations were practical, focused, and necessary. Winter demanded awareness not only of immediate needs, but of long-term outcomes. A cold untreated could cascade into weakness. A minor injury ignored could worsen. Mindful reflection allowed women to anticipate and prevent harm, weaving foresight into daily survival. In these ways, medieval winter care became a holistic practice. The body, mind, and community were tended together, each reinforcing the other. Rituals, small and repetitive, accumulated into a coherent system of health and endurance. Knowledge was practical, tested, and shared, and every act, whether rubbing fat into hands, braiding hair, layering blankets, or brewing herbal tea, was infused with intention. As the hearth flickered and shadows lengthened across the floor, women could pause to observe the results of their diligence. Their skin, though touched by frost and labor, retained resilience. Their muscles, though tired, preserved strength. Their minds, tempered by reflection, were steady. Children slept in warmth, families were fed, and the rhythms of life, though constrained by winter, persisted. Each night concluded with a quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that through patience, observation, and careful attention, they had preserved life, nurtured health, and maintained the wisdom that would carry them through yet another season. In this continuous practice of care, the medieval woman found her strength not in spectacle, but in endurance. She wove resilience into her body, spirit, and household, crafting a winter existence that was survivable, dignified, and profoundly human. Every herb, every stitch, every reflective thought contributed to a legacy of well-being, ensuring that the lessons of winter care endured across generations, invisible yet enduring. As winter drew toward its final months, the village and its inhabitants had settled into a rhythm that balanced labor, care, and quiet endurance. The women, who had guided their families through the relentless cold, had become masters of observation, patience, and subtle skill. Their practices, honed over decades and passed through generations, ensured that the household survived not only the immediate hardships of frost and darkness, but also the longer arc of health, strength, and continuity. Looking back, one could trace the delicate choreography of winter life, hands rubbed with salves before the first tasks of dawn, fingers stiffened, and then massaged to maintain mobility, hair braided tightly, protected under linen and wool to prevent tangles, lice, and chill, herbs carefully dried, stored and used to infuse water, meals, and salves with both fragrance and healing power. Every gesture, however small, contributed to a larger tapestry of resilience. Yet, care was never confined to the body alone. Emotional and mental attention remained a constant, whether in the form of quiet reflection beside the fire, a song hummed softly to a sleeping child, or stories shared to pass down wisdom and humor. These moments, intertwined with domestic work, created a subtle equilibrium that carried families through the months when the sun barely appeared and the frost threatened to make every task arduous. In a sense, winter was a teacher, and its lessons were understood deeply through repeated, attentive practice. The interconnectedness of survival became evident in community interactions. Women visited neighbors, exchanged remedies, advice, and news, and supported one another in times of sickness or misfortune. Even brief encounters reinforced shared knowledge and collective endurance. The communal web of care, though subtle, was vital. It ensured that the wisdom accrued over lifetimes was not lost, that the younger generation absorbed lessons in hygiene, nourishment, and practical medicine, and that no family faced winter completely alone. Self-care rituals, though modest, carried profound significance. Rubbing fat into chapped hands, bathing in herb-infused water, massaging sore joints, braiding hair meticulously, layering blankets for warmth, each was a deliberate act of preservation, a recognition of the fragility and resilience of the human body. These actions were neither decorative nor indulgent. They were essential. They exemplified a deep understanding that survival depended not only on food, fire, and shelter, but on the sustained attention to physical and emotional well-being. Women's observations extended to subtle details: the stiffness of a child's fingers, the redness of their own cheeks after chores, the dull ache of muscles worked through snow-laden days. Every small signal informed next steps: more warmth, a poultice, a rest, or a reinforcing of clothing. The rhythm of attention, repair, and foresight became almost second nature, a silent language learned over years of experience. Through these practices, medieval women shaped not only the present, but the future. Their foresight and care ensured that children grew strong, that families remained healthy, and that the knowledge of winter survival endured. Every carefully preserved root, every shared story, every braided lock of hair was a contribution to an ongoing legacy of endurance and skill. These women were custodians of continuity, maintaining not only life, but the quality and dignity of that life against a season that demanded vigilance and wisdom. The night, when it finally arrived, brought a moment of quiet triumph. The hearth glowed steadily, blankets were layered, infants were swaddled, and the family rested. The women, though tired, observed their work with satisfaction. Hands softened by salves, muscles soothed, spirits nurtured. They allowed themselves to exhale, knowing that their careful attention had preserved life through another day, another night, another stretch of merciless winter. In these silent acknowledgments, there was both pride and humility, a recognition of the small, steady victories that defined existence in a world of frost. Winter care, as practiced by these medieval women, was holistic and enduring. It encompassed body, mind, and community. It fused observation with ritual, labor with reflection, endurance with joy. The legacy of these practices was not recorded in ink or preserved in grand monuments, but lived on in memory, in habit, in the continuity of generations who had learned, quietly and effectively, to sustain themselves and those they loved. And so, as the first hints of spring began to creep across the frost-ridden landscape, there remained in every woman a quiet sense of accomplishment. The body had been protected, the family nurtured, the mind preserved, and knowledge transmitted. The winter, though harsh and unyielding, had been met with vigilance, ingenuity, and unwavering care. In the small acts, massaging hands, braiding hair, tending fires, preparing meals, and nurturing the soul, these women had created life in miniature, a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the enduring strength of human care. The lessons of winter were clear. Survival depended not only on endurance, but on mindfulness, foresight, and deliberate, repeated care. Strength was measured not solely in physical labor, but in the patience to maintain warmth, health, and spirit, day after day, night after night. Through these practices, medieval women left a quiet but profound legacy, a map of human ingenuity, tenderness, and resilience that carried their families through the coldest months and left a mark that echoed beyond the frost, across generations yet to come. In the end, it was the accumulation of countless small, attentive acts that defined the story of winter care, a legacy of resilience, compassion, and quiet triumph. And though the seasons would continue, bringing cold, darkness, and challenge, the wisdom embedded in these acts ensured that life persisted, hope endured, and human warmth remained, even in the harshest winter.